A viewer asked if physicians take statins, and if they do they suffer the same adverse effects as the rest of us? Well, I couldn't find any real statistics on that. I did find a case series report. That's this week's video. Stay tuned. This paper, Physicians' Experiences as Patients with Statin Side Effects, describes a short series of case studies on 7 doctors who took statins and had adverse side effects, and it describes their experiences as patients. So we're talking about physicians as patients. Full disclosure, these are stock photographs and not the actual doctors, who remain anonymous. All I had was limited demographic data, basically age and gender, so I just tried finding pictures of doctors that match those demographics. It puts human faces next to all the sea of data that you're going to see. In this study, several physicians self-identified as having had adverse effects from statins. The authors of the study, and it's only 7 pages, so it's well worth reading, there's a link in the description, they limited the cases to 7 of the 14 physicians who had self-identified, whose adverse effects were assessed as either probable or definite based on the Navar Adverse Drug Reaction Probability Scale. That's a topic for a future video. Nothing of a statistical nature can be derived from this study. Case studies are like anecdotes, except that they have been verified and studied in depth, but they lack the context of a wider population. When I first picked up this study, I had certain expectations. The first one is I expected that because of their positions as physicians, their own doctors would more likely treat their adverse effects seriously. The second expectation I had, that as physicians, they're more likely to recognize that they're having adverse effects that are statin related and be able to describe them to their primary care physicians. And third, their personal experiences with statins would impact how they viewed and prescribed them if they were in a specialty where prescribing would be expected. Of these expectations, only the third one turned out to be met. Many of the physicians as patients in the study faced the same hurdles with their doctors that many of us do. Many did not initially suspect that it was statins that were causing their symptoms. Here we see the adverse effects experienced by physicians, and they varied widely. These 8 adverse effects, I personally have experienced 5 of them myself, so we have a lot in common. The Naranjo categories are doubtful, possible, probable, and definite, with only the probable and the definite being included in the study. So that's what the P's and the D's mean there. So let's look at these 7 cases. We're going to start with Dr. A. Dr. A specializes in radiology. In his 50s, his symptoms included cognitive effects, neuropathy, and glucose intolerance. He had reduced accuracy, these are all because of the cognitive problems, difficulty understanding case presentations, and mixing up orders for patients, which could have gotten him into a bit of trouble. Dr. A feared disclosing his cognitive issues to his own physicians, and we can understand why. I mean, suppose it was just fatigue. Why endanger your career over a temporary situation? The most interesting aspect of it all is this. It was a medical student who first suggested statins could be linked to his neuropathy, not his cognitive issues, but his neuropathy. His PCP wasn't going to follow up on a neuropathy, saying that it wasn't necessary unless he had diabetes. From what I could tell, the cognitive improvements after stopping statins were kind of an unexpected bonus. You can imagine his relief upon discovering that. I mean, I'm reading between the lines on that, but I think that's what happened. So after discontinuation, his cognition recovered within a week. The neuropathy mostly subsided over 7 months. I had a similar experience. Cognitive effects went away much faster than the neuropathy, which lingered for a couple years and only now is, I would say, 99% resolved. Dr. B, specialty was internal medicine, in his 40s. He had muscle weakness, myalgia, fatigue, pain, shortness of breath. Dire impact on his professional career. He discontinued inpatient care, hours were curtailed, his patient volume and his subsequent income was reduced. His experience with the physician, he didn't state it directly, but it does appear that PCPB, when I refer to PCPB, I mean the primary care physician of Dr. B. So Dr. B is the patient, PCPB is his doctor. It does seem that they were thorough. Numerous specialists were consulted about his symptoms. This was before statins were suspected. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, also known as ALS, was suspected, and ultimately a muscle biopsy showed mitochondrial myopathy, which was attributed to statin use. Now, notice that the short-term use of statins led to potentially permanent damage. Now, you may ask, if there was limited recovery, how did they know it was the statins? Well, we have a relatively young patient with sudden occurrence of mitochondrial myopathy that came out of the blue shortly after being put on statins. It seems that if things get bad enough to be picked up by a test, the damage may be long-term. So this was confirmed by physical tests. The case for it being an adverse effect is much stronger when there is a measurable physical manifestation, such as what you can find in a biopsy. Dr. C, cardiac surgeon, in his 40s, his symptoms were irritability, and it's worse than maybe you would think irritability means, myalgia and fatigue. The professional impact was also severe. Mood changes resulted in his employer mandating a psychiatric review. So that's how bad it got. And the mood changes were reported by coworkers like, hey, Dr. C is getting out of hand here. So the important thing is there was independent observation of the mood changes, which either he did not recognize or at least did not admit to. And as a result, a formerly highly functional cardiac surgeon was subjected to professional review and psychiatric evaluation. Of all the cases, this disturbs me the most because it could easily have been career-ending if there hadn't been a resolution, had Dr. C himself not realized a possible connection. The PCP did acknowledge some adverse effects, probably myalgia and fatigue, but apparently the doctor eventually did make the connection. Dr. C himself did make the connection with the mood changes, because when he was sent to the psychiatrist, he apparently mentioned it to the psychiatrist, or at least the psychiatrist knew that he was on statins or somehow made that connection and consulted with other physicians familiar with these statin-induced behavioral changes and confirmed that they can occur. The result was he got off the statins, of course, and the symptoms resolved, and that was not just his self-judgment, probably his self-judgment for the myalgia and the fatigue. His co-workers reported the improvement in what was before then very unusual behaviors. And again, I had a similar experience. My direct reports, the people I was managing, told me that there was something up with me, and I followed up and determined that it was also probably the statins. Dr. C's feelings on statins, well, this is how he put it. I have no interest in going back on statins. More education on statin adverse effects is needed. Dr. D, his specialty was emergency medicine. He was in his 50s when he first got symptoms, in his 60s when they were at their worst. Mitochondriopathy, myopathy, neuropathy, and exercise intolerance. Now, there is a difference between mitochondriopathy and mitochondrial myopathy. One's, I think, a broader category than the other, but all related to muscle and mitochondrial function. The professional impact was, well, the disability from statins contributed to his retirement. Now, being in his 60s, maybe he was close anyway, not certain, but it was his non-physician sister who first proposed the connection after she herself was found to be statin intolerant. His experience was his own doctor was initially dismissive and physicians rolling their eyes at suggestions of statin connection. We've probably all experienced that, even when presented with literature that supported the notion. There were a lot of tests detailed in this paper. Dr. D was diagnosed, and the statement on the report from the lab was, patient is considered to have statin-induced myopathy. So even though he ran into a lot of resistance from the mainstream medical professionals he was going to, in the end, it was proving to be statins. The result was he does have what he considers a 75% improvement 3.5 years after discontinuation, but that statin-induced disability contributed to his retiring. His position is, my knowledge of statins was elementary and naive. Adverse effects can be very disabling, can happen in substantially delayed fashion. And again, if you've seen some of my reports, it was several years before my adverse effects really broke through to my consciousness. So definitely the timing of them, sometimes it's immediate, but sometimes it can be a long time before they finally show up. Dr. E was a physical medicine and rehab specialist. In his 50s, his symptoms were muscle weakness, myalgia, and exercise intolerance. There really wasn't much professional impact because he had retired young in order to pursue athletic adventures, as he puts it here. And I can emphasize the most with Dr. E since I also retired for that same reason. As many of you know, I do a lot of hiking. I was off statins at the time. He had been on simvastatin for 13 years with adverse effects not being noted, at least not in this report. He discontinued them for 2 years, but restarted in combination with niacin, and within a month, these adverse events developed. The study didn't note if the combination with niacin was considered to be pertinent, or whether it was his new exercise level that contributed to the problem with the statins. His experience with the physicians, they were generally unsympathetic, and the symptoms did not register much concern, and we can see that happening. If it's not outright hostility, you can still see physicians blowing it off, like, yeah, well, that's common, you're getting older. The result was there is some improvement after 2 years, but the way they worded it in this report was there is substantial residuum. His opinion on statins is that they should not be prescribed to those who are athletically inclined. They have a real propensity to adversely affect the mitochondria on a permanent basis. So he considers that he was damaged on a permanent basis. Another sad case similar to Dr. B as far as the long-term damage. Dr. F, obstetrician gynecologist, in his 70s, his symptoms were muscle weakness and myalgia. There wasn't a lot of professional impact because he was already in the process of retiring, but he could no longer drive due to the symptoms, due to the muscle weakness. His experience with his physician was generally positive, he says, actually. Cardiologist F, his cardiologist, initially dismissed the statin connection until his own family member, in other words, a family member of the cardiologist, developed similar symptoms. I find it a little disturbing that the doctors reject statin adverse effects until it happens to them or a close relative, but at least they were willing to understand that maybe there was more to it than they previously understood. Now, this doctor, Dr. F, did have an extensive cardiac history, is the way they put it. While there appears to be some improvement when off statins, his high cholesterol, I guess, is the reason why they're putting him back on statins. He's been on a whole bunch of different ones. A lot of times they will say, well, if you have adverse effects on one statin, you might not have them on another. And I suppose that could be true, though my experience and this doctor's experience is not that. It's not clear if he's off statins now, but his opinion of statins is, well, when he notices gait abnormalities, in other words, walking abnormalities in friends and even strangers, he asks them if they are on statins because that was his experience. And that's sometimes called the statin shuffle. I've heard that called before. I haven't seen it too much in literature, but it's one of the outward signs of the adverse effects of statins. Our last case study is Dr. G. She was in radiology in her 80s, so this was interesting. She had simply cognitive symptoms. Professional impact was disability from statins contributed to retirement. Well, she was in her 80s, but she may have been one of these people who was assuming she was going to work forever and enjoyed her work. The cognitive issues she had were confusion and disorientation and short-term memory loss that started shortly after she started statins. She was treated for a year with medications for dementia. They assumed she was getting Alzheimer's. They also considered depression and pseudo-dementia. I deduced from the brief statements that there must have been some struggle between her primary care physician and the doctor before the statins were discontinued. It stated that the PCP dismissed the statin connection, and apparently her son was going with her to the doctors because having cognitive difficulties, you really need somebody with you who can remember things, write things down, ask questions. Her son stated he replied in a condescending tone of disbelief that I read too much. This is a doctor who really needs to be reported, not just the bad bedside manner, but the actual disrespect to the patient and the incorrect diagnosis. Within a month after she got off statin, she was apparently back to her old self. They tell this story. She ran into somebody in a grocery store or something, and they hadn't seen her in 8 months, so they must have seen her when she was at her worst. And she immediately recognized that person, and the person was astounded at the improvement that she had. It was easy to ascribe the cognitive problems to age, basically. But it appears that she was first put on statins at age 80. Why anybody would think it appropriate to put an 80-year-old woman on statins for any reason is troubling. So this physician, PCPG, I hope he or she suffered some fallout from this. This PCP ended a person's career with what I feel is a totally inappropriate statin prescription. Leave an 80-year-old alone. If they've gone this far, you shouldn't be putting them on statins. And a lot of physicians actually agree with that. The data to support putting elderly on statins is really not there. So before I get to my closing thoughts, I'd like to bring another case to your attention that wasn't in this paper, but it was reported in a documentary called Statin Nation. I'll leave a link in the description. I encourage all viewers who have never seen this to watch it. It's an hour-long documentary. Included in this documentary is another case of a physician as patient whose career was almost ruined by unrecognized statin adverse effects. This is her real identity. I assume she is okay with my revealing it since it's public at this point. It's in the documentary, so that's worth watching. Probably the most astounding and disheartening aspect of these cases is the number of these doctors who had their concerns initially dismissed. PCPs miss the possibility of connections to statins, and one has to wonder how many other cases exist where this is done and the patient just doesn't have the knowledge or perseverance to push back. If a doctor as a patient has this sort of trouble, what hope do the rest of us have? In the face of widespread arrogance in statin proponents, as Dr. Richard Lehman put it in an editorial that I reviewed recently. It'd be easy to give up. But if you're suffering from the use of statins, don't give up. Keep pushing back, keep fighting, and if necessary, find a different doctor who's going to treat you properly. So that's all I have on this topic. If you appreciate this content, please like, share, subscribe, and comment on this topic or others you'd like me to cover. And if you haven't seen this video, I recommend you take a look at it now. Thanks for listening.